Everything you know about Bitcoin Pizza Day is wrong. It's way more than 10,000 Bitcoin spent on a pizza. That's not just 1.6 billion. That is multiple billions. There's a lot that you didn't know. You've been lied to. Bitcoin Season 2 is brought to you by Arch.network, the protocol building bridgeless apps on Bitcoin. More on Arch later on the show. Let's kick it off. So, Colin, everybody's been lying to our listeners. They say that Laszlo, however you say his last name, Hanyak, spent 10,000 Bitcoin, but that's a lie.
The fake news media is at it again, Charlie. And we, the reputable rag independent media that may or may not have typos in some of our articles, are here to correct the record. And you are right. Everyone knows about the May 22nd, 2010 historic Bitcoin Pizza Day purchase, the first recorded purchase of anything with Bitcoin, which is really kind of an exchange. It was brokered OTC on Bitcoin Talk, but for the sake of the annals, it was the first real world purchase with Bitcoin. And everyone every year on May 22nd on the internet who knows about this is all, gobsmacked and up in arms about the fact that this was a $1 billion purchase now at this point, and that Laszlo fumbled what would now be multi-generational wealth on two admittedly very mediocre pizzas.
Oh, yeah. What an idiot. He spent 10,000 Bitcoin on two pizzas. So dumb. Well, it gets better than that, dear listener.
It does get better than that. Because Laszlo actually spent nearly 80,000 Bitcoin that year, ostensibly on pizza. There's no real way to confirm this outside of a few things that he posted on Bitcoin Talk in the same forum and thread. And the reason why he did this might shock you, but the reason is actually ostensibly the reason could stem from Laszlo's much more consequential contribution to Bitcoin in the early days, and that was GPU mining. We'll get to that towards the second half of the show. But to kick it off, maybe we just start with
let's kick it off. I want to throw you a bone here. So for the listener, you, Colin, wrote one of the definitive articles on Bitcoin Pizza Day back in 2018 or 2019 when you interviewed Laszlo for was it CoinDesk at the time?
It was a Bitcoin magazine.
For Bitcoin magazine. And so you have a lot of primary source material here that you put together, which debunks a lot of the preconceptions we have about Bitcoin Pizza Day.
Yeah, and not to toot my own horn a little bit, I think I was the first person to report on the fact that he spent more than just the initial Pizza Day purchase. But the focus of the article was on that GPU mining discovery by Laszlo. But it was a really fun interview. And as far as I know, it's one of the only crypto media interviews or Bitcoin media interviews with Laszlo. Usually he's been on 60 Minutes and all this other stuff. But I had the article pulled up for those who are on video. A lot of banger quotes in this, which we will consult here shortly. But before we get to that, let's just go to the infamous Bitcoin Pizza Day solicitation on Bitcoin Talk from Laszlo. So for those of you who don't know, Bitcoin Talk was and still is one of the primary forums for specifically Bitcoin technical discussion. It was established by Satoshi Nakamoto, and Laszlo joined in, I think, like April 14th, I believe. And shortly after, in May, he made this post saying, I quote, "I'll pay 10,000 Bitcoins for a couple of pizzas, like maybe two large ones, so I have some left over for the next day. I like having pizza left over to nibble on later." I love how idiosyncratic this is. You can make the pizza yourself and bring it to my house or order it for me from a delivery place, but what I'm aiming for is getting food delivered in exchange for Bitcoins where I don't have to order or prepare it myself, kind of like ordering a, quote, breakfast platter, end quote, at a hotel or something. They just bring it to you to eat and you're happy. And he posted this on May 18th. It went unanswered until May 22nd. And another Bitcoin Talk user ordered him 2 Papa John's pizzas, which is the other part of this that I think is just really tragic. The dude traded 10,000 Bitcoin for like mid-tier at best pizza.
Papa John's back in 2000. Well, okay, you're talking about Papa John's today. Papa John's back then was actually probably a little better.
Maybe before Big Papa John, got ousted.
Before Papa John
slur.
Jr. Just John got a hold of the franchise.
But anyway, so he got these 2 pizzas delivered, and you can see here one of his kids reaching up. It's an adorable picture. I don't really necessarily like having other people.
That kid is 100 years old today. No, I'm just kidding. No,
yeah, right. Well, I was thinking about that the other day. It's like, oh, they're teenagers, and now they're probably seeing all these media articles about how their fortune was forfeited for bottom shelf pizza. Anyway, so there are the pizzas, and this is the part of the history that people don't really know, is that this was an open offer, as Laszlo says in the same thread. On June 12th, he said, "This is an open offer, by the way. I will trade 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 of these pizzas anytime as long as I have the funds. I usually have plenty." And he even says here that the exchange is favorable for anyone who does it because the 2 pizzas are just $25, maybe $30 if you give the guy a nice tip. Yes, very favorable. If they held those Bitcoin, they'd be worth over $1 billion right now. And so it's an open offer up until the point when Bitcoin's running up at this time. You can see on August 4th, one member says $600 is a great deal for pizza, I thought. Fast forward 15 years, dear poster, and you will see that they're much more dear than that. And then Laszlo ends up actually closing the offer. Let's see. Maybe it's in another thread, but I think around August 22nd or so, he says, "I can't do this anymore. I'm running out of my Bitcoin, and I can't afford to do this." So he closes the offer then. And in another post on February 14th, when people are asking him about on February 14th, 2014, people were asking him about his Bitcoin. He has a quote where he says, I sold it all for pizza." And he's not exaggerating with this, which is the most tragic thing. And this is part of what Charlie's saying about everything you know about it is wrong. If we look at the wallet address that Laszlo posted on his first ever Bitcoin Talk post, his wallet balance peaks at 43,854 Bitcoin, and then it precipitously drops over the course of 2010 into sub 1,000 Bitcoin. And then by June 2011, his wallet is completely drained. The total outflows and inflows were 81,432 Bitcoin. And from rough calculations, I didn't actually add up or subtract all of the inflows from 2010, but this nets out to about 79,000, 80,000 Bitcoin spent in 2010, assumedly on pizza or whatever else Laszlo bought from Bitcoin Talk users on the forum. Now, there's no real way to verify whether all of those outflows were spent on pizza, but just giving ourselves a little bit of leeway here, considering he said it was an open offer and considering he did say, I spent it all on pizza, there's a chance that, he did the pizza trade multiple times over. And in that Bitcoin Magazine article, he said that he spent close to 100,000 that year on pizza. I believe he was just rounding up from that 80,000 number.
Yeah, and he's been pretty clear that he feels like he still views it like he hit the jackpot, in that he ended up just getting free pizza for a hobby of his a number of times for like a year. So, I mean, this is one of those things where everyone tries to apply a retroactive lens on it, but you got to imagine you are Laszlo in 2010 when these little Bitcoins don't have no value, basically. And you're like, oh, I could trick somebody to give me pizza. That rules.
Yeah, I think that's important context. When Laszlo was active on Bitcoin Talk, right, this was roughly a little over a year after the Genesis block was mined. He was one of maybe 100 or a few hundred enthusiasts that were developing Bitcoin and mining in the early days. And to your point, Charlie, this is my favorite quote from that interview. There's 2 parts to the quote. He said, quote, I wanted to do the pizza thing because to me it was free pizza. I mean, I coded this thing and mined Bitcoin, and I felt like I was winning the internet that day. I got pizza for contributing to an open source project. Usually hobbies are a time sink and a money sink. And in this case, my hobby bought me dinner. And later on, he said, a trade happens, this is from Laszlo again, because both parties think that they're getting a good deal. I felt like I was beating the internet, getting free food. I was like, man, I got these GPUs linked together. Now I'm going to mine twice as fast. I'm going to be eating free food. I'll never have to buy food again. You really got to love that perspective, because at least back then, when I talked to Laszlo, there was no bitterness or regret in his voice. He was very pragmatic about it. And this is what people forget too. You know, we're looking back at the pizza purchase with 14 or 15 years at this point of retrospective knowledge. Laszlo had no idea that Bitcoin was going to end up surging to $100,000. At the time, it was still a very niche project with no clear use case outside of the Silk Road, and, you know, some hypothetical use cases that hadn't been adopted yet of storing value and having a censorship resistant money, right? And he was an early adopter, and these Bitcoin that he was mining were coming in every day, all the time. So, I mean, why shouldn't he consider doing this, right? It seemed like a no-brainer.
Let me tell you about one of the most slept on opportunities in crypto. Arch is building fast, composable DeFi apps on Bitcoin. Arch apps tap into the OG blockchain with by far the most liquidity and best brand in crypto. I've known the team for over a year. The tech they're building is solid, and they are racing towards mainnet. There's dexes like Saturn, meme coins on funkybit.fun, instant loans on Cha-Ching, and so much more. Plus, they're rewarding testnet users. So join me in trying out Arch while it's still early. So, I think what we can get into here is the part. If there's anybody still listening, because we're 11 minutes in, we've I think, you know, tagged all the lizard brain stuff. The more interesting thing here is, why did Laszlo sell his Bitcoin? Because it goes beyond just pizza. It's not just like Laszlo wakes up one day and goes, I have all this Bitcoin, I want pizza. Why did Laszlo have all the Bitcoin? Is there more to the story of why he specifically offered 10,000? Because that's a kind of arbitrary amount. And the story is actually much more interesting, because instead of Laszlo just being one of the people to make the first known transaction in Bitcoin, in a way, he may have also kind of saved Bitcoin. So I'm going to let you get into this, Colin.
I like that. He's the penitent at the altar, supining himself in front of the, you know, I don't know, the god of disenfranchisement.
God is Satoshi is God. We know this from all the other podcasts that we listen to. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, two things to highlight before we start. Like you said, Charlie, the why behind why he did it, which we'll get into, and also how he was able to do this so many times over. No one tends to ask how he had almost 100,000 Bitcoin in the early days. Part of the reason for that was one of his often forgot discoveries, which is GPU mining. So Laszlo was one of the earliest developers working on Bitcoin. He established the first Mac OS implementation of Bitcoin Core. I don't think it was called Bitcoin Core back at the time.
It was like Bitcoin QT, and
Yeah, so he was the first person to roll out a Bitcoin implementation for Mac OS, meaning you could download Bitcoin and run a node on a Mac compatible device, whereas before, Bitcoin was solely Windows and Linux focused. So he rolled out the Mac OS build on May 2nd, and it was well received, not too many people active at the time. And then shortly after, a little over a week after, on May 10th, he updated it and said that it will use your GPU to generate Bitcoins. This works really well if you have a good GPU like a NVIDIA 8800 or something like that. So up until this point, Bitcoin was specifically mined with computer processing units. So you would just boot up your computer, run the mining program, and you would generate Bitcoin that way. Laszlo introduced GPU mining using your graphics card. And this was an order of magnitude more powerful, something around 10x of what a CPU could do, depending on the quality of your graphics card. And so Laszlo started doing this. And because of this, I think he mentioned somewhere on one of the Bitcoin Talk forums, he went from producing, or maybe this was an interview I read, he went from producing maybe 1 or 2 blocks a day to like a block or 2 an hour, because his hash rate was so
which
much.
For context, like Bitcoin on average gets 144 blocks a day or about 6 blocks an hour. So if Laszlo is getting 1 block an hour, he is 1/6 of the entire network. We've seen like pools get to be like 25, 30, 40% of the overall blocks, but it's rare that we've seen a single like actual miner themselves do that.
That hash rate, that hash power that he cultivated through his GPUs ended up affording him 1 to 1.5%, I believe, of the entire Bitcoin supply between 2009 and 2010. And so, it doesn't sound like as much as you might think, but that's a crazy amount when you consider that you're just running your computer or running your graphics card to generate it. And so Laszlo introduced this, and shortly after he introduced this, Bitcoin's hash rate starts absolutely ripping. I'm going to get a chart up here in just a second.
The chart really does help show it.
It took a while for this to catch on for a couple of reasons. I think Bitcoin was still pretty obscure, but also, as listeners of Writer's Room will know, the Silk Road was starting to become more popular at this time. And Silk Road's popularity coincided with Bitcoin's first big run up. As the price increased, there was a greater incentive to mine, and you started seeing more deployment of hash rate. But as you can see from this chart, Laszlo introduced GPU mining on May 10th in 2010. And by the end of the year, Bitcoin's hash rate had accelerated by 130,000%. Again, this is mostly due to 2 factors. One, the Silk Road giving Bitcoin really a clear USD rate peg, right? And then also the fact that Laszlo opened up Pandora's box with GPU mining. And in opening up Pandora's box, he drew a polite reprimand, not the ire so much, of Bitcoin's creator, Satoshi Nakamoto. This comes from reporting by Nathaniel Popper, who is not exactly a Bitcoin fan, but he wrote a fantastic book back in the day called Digital Gold, kind of archiving Bitcoin's early development and its early history. And from this book, there's a fantastic passage on Laszlo, and Laszlo shared with Nathaniel an email that Satoshi sent him. So without this, we wouldn't even know that this email exists. And Satoshi sent the following to Laszlo after the GPU mining cat was out of the bag. Quote, "A big attraction to new users is that anyone with a computer can generate some free coins. When there are 5,000 users, that incentive may fade, but for now it's still true. GPUs would prematurely limit the incentive to only those with high-end GPU hardware. It's inevitable that GPU computer clusters will eventually hog all the generated coins, but I don't want to hasten that day. If the difficulty gets really high, that increases the value of each coin in a way, since the supply becomes more limited. The supply is the same, 10 coins every 10 minutes. But remember, back then, the block reward was 50 Bitcoin. But GPUs are much less evenly distributed, so the generated coins only go towards rewarding 20% of the people for joining the network instead of 100%. I don't mean to sound like a socialist. I don't care if wealth is concentrated, but for now, we get more growth by giving that money to 100% of people than giving it to 20%. Also, the longer we can delay the GPU arms race, the more mature the open client library gets, and the more people will have open client compatible video cards. If we see the difficulty factor that someone is using too much GPU, we can certainly pick this open client stuff up again. Maybe my effort to maintain GPU, in a sense, is running out of time. It's worked so far." I would say that last point is underplaying it. I mean, once Laszlo published this, it was there was no going back. And as long as Bitcoin was going to go up in price, people were going to use their GPUs to mine it. But what this email underscores is the fact that Laszlo's Pizza Day purchase may have been a form of penance to divest himself from an accelerated hoarding of Bitcoin that Satoshi wasn't expecting to happen for some time. And then we can also maybe look at the subsequent Pizza Day purchases as knock-on penance to absolve him of this, original sin of introducing GPU mining before Satoshi envisioned it being introduced. Now, the one thing I would say is that, like you said, Charlie, in a way, what Laszlo was doing was helping to distribute the wealth and to try to make sure that Bitcoin was more evenly distributed in the early days. But clearly, I don't think that two things. One, you can't put the cat back in the bag. It doesn't want to go back in the bag. It's making too many Bitcoins. Number two, whether or not Laszlo actually divested himself of that fortune probably wouldn't matter that much in the long run for Bitcoin's success, because he's one man. And ultimately, as we saw from that hash rate chart, he wasn't the only one using GPU clusters to mine Bitcoin throughout 2010. And that opened up an entirely new meta for Bitcoin mining, which we'll dive into here in a second.
Yeah, and you think about, I make this analogy. I don't want to hold up Michael Saylor as this beautiful, perfect person who has Bitcoin's best at heart, but Michael Saylor has, in word, promised to burn his personal Bitcoin when he's gone. And a lot of people don't take this seriously, but regardless, he said he's going to do it. And that's now a significant amount. I think he says he has like $1 billion in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think he's got like a 30,000. So
he's got a ton. That's his personal Bitcoin. This is outside MicroStrategy. So, and he says like, this would be a donation back to the Bitcoin network. Well, whether or not it's intentional or accidental, like some people like lost the Bitcoin, like these do play important roles in Bitcoin's story to distribute and diversify the amount of people holding Bitcoin. It's a funny, like, double-edged sword that the very people who manage to accumulate a lot of Bitcoin, because of their obsession with it, also tend to appreciate the importance of it remaining comparatively decentralized. Now, I'm not saying that is necessarily the case today or will continue to be the case, but that has been a major trend in Bitcoin's story so far. And it begins with Laszlo. Laszlo clearly is wanted to publicly signal about this. And am I correct that Colin Satoshi actually even mentioned Laszlo's like GPU meta shift by name? Like, didn't Satoshi actually be like, wasn't there like an interaction on the Bitcoin Talk forum somewhere?
I'm not sure. All I know of is the email. I don't know when his last post on Bitcoin Talk was some years after the whole GPU thing, so it wouldn't shock me if that were true.
Yeah, so we have here Laszlo basically being good guy Laszlo. If you remember when our callback to memes, which were popular at the time, and distributing his Bitcoin, and then also like such a early delicate moment in Bitcoin's history. It is a bit of like damned if you do, damned if you don't, because would Bitcoin have succeeded if Laszlo took this action? I like to think it would have, but we don't know. It is and we celebrate Bitcoin Pizza Day because it is a very good reference to call back to an important moment in Bitcoin's history.
Yeah, and I think celebrate is the right term for this, because most Bitcoiners don't look at Laszlo's, at least I would hopefully think that most Bitcoiners don't look at Laszlo's spending of the Bitcoin in the same scandalous, flabbergasted light as a general audience does, right? There's kind of a reverence for what he did because it was, again, the first real world purchase. And then people who really, really know the history also celebrate him for some of those early technical developments, like the Mac OS build for Bitcoin Core and for the GPU mining discovery, which, as Satoshi pointed out, it was inevitable that would happen anyway. And I think it's commendable that Laszlo was the first person to take the jump. And, maybe this is a good chance to hop into this part of the discussion, but it really did completely change the game for Bitcoin mining, because after that point, you had a very proto form of the industrial scale mining farms that dominate the Bitcoin network today. Instead of people running their solo CPUs, I'm sure some had multiple CPUs running, but now by just taking individual graphics cards, you had a much more efficient way of deploying small scale mining farms. And that was the first time, once GPU mining was introduced, that you had hobbyists and early miners slapping together rigs, deploying them in their basements, their attics, bonus rooms, wherever, and actually deploying multiple units at once. with the goal of mining as much Bitcoin as possible. And, I guess this is where it gets kind of hairy, because you could make the argument, as Satoshi does, that was maybe detrimental in some ways to Bitcoin's decentralization. And as we've seen now, the kind of mining that goes on today, 100 plus megawatt facilities, all pointing towards centralized pool services, is completely different. These guys were still building their own block templates and mining the coins themselves, winning blocks, not relinquishing their hash rate to a pool. But I would argue that whether or not Laszlo did it, it was, as Satoshi did himself, it was inevitable, and it was going to happen eventually. So I almost look at it as in the arc of history, this is the way things were supposed to go. It's just Laszlo was the first one to discover it. Maybe we delay it by a few years, but you would still get the same centralization that we see in the mining industry today, I think.
It's, you saying this, it kind of makes you feel like maybe another reason why we celebrate Bitcoin Pizza Day is because it was this comparatively like more innocent hobbyist era of Bitcoin. And it does mark a very clear shift where Bitcoin goes from being a fun little idea that a bunch of people are playing around with to now it's out in the real world. People are buying and selling stuff on the Silk Road with it. They are now figuring out how to commercialize, go from home setup to commercial setup to acquire more Bitcoin. And then within, this is 2010. So within 3.5 years, the titan of Bitmain, the most powerful and largest mining company to exist, and still to this day is the largest one, would be founded and enter into a new era.
Yeah, Satoshi didn't foresee ASICs, which is interesting. That's something that
we could debate that. Like Satoshi said, quote, specialized data centers. Large computer warehouses. I think that was the term. So I could see that. And this is a common debate between like Bitcoin Cash people and Bitcoin. Is like it's not in the white paper, but not explicitly in the white paper, but it's like this idea of one CPU, one vote. This used to be a major rallying cry in early Bitcoin. Yet we see empirically that Bitcoin cannot function like that. It does bend towards ASICs. There's actually a really good paper that I read from 2014 on arguing how we will any proof of work network will always be incentivized to go move towards ASICs. And for the listener, ASICs are these specialized hardware that is, an order of magnitude more powerful than Laszlo's GPUs that he was using.
Hundreds of times, if not thousands of times. And people sometimes get confused because ASIC stands for application specific integrated circuit. And these are the chips that power everything from your phones to the computer that you're using right now, to the computer in your car, to your smart TV and your smart fridge, if you have one of those. And for Bitcoin mining specifically, the ASICs do one thing really well. And for Bitcoin miners, they are optimized for just producing hashes. And then once, it seems linear now. It wasn't a given at the time, but, the mining industry has made these kind of generational leaps from CPUs to GPUs to ASICs. There are FPGAs in there, although some miners kind of debate, like, did that actually ever happen, or is that just a shared hallucination?
There's always like one person that's like, yeah, I did FPGAs. I'm like, okay, do you have one? Can you show me? If the FPGA is not in the ASIC museum, the miner museum by that one dude, CoinDad,
it's not canon.
Then it's not canon. It's not in my book. Well, I think is that everything that have we exposed all the lies and all the misdirection that big mainstream media has told for the past?
I think so. I don't think there's anything else to pluck from this. I imagine this is a topic that we might revisit again next year. It's my favorite Bitcoin holiday, and if you needed any more of an indication that Bitcoin is in fact a quasi-religion, you've got the Immaculate Conception with White Paper Day,
October 31st,
Clock Day, and then you have things like Bitcoin Pizza Day, which is kind of our greasy, as I write in the article, our greasy simulacrum of Thanksgiving, where Bitcoiners all around the world buy pizza and then stuff their face with pie. But you gotta love it, you know. And it's one of the only holidays in Bitcoin that I actually observe. I mean, I don't really do anything for White Paper Day, but every Bitcoin Pizza Day, hot fresh pie for dinner.
Yeah, you wake up, you go downstairs, and Satoshi has left pizzas underneath your tree. That's my kids are gonna wake up. They're gonna celebrate. We're not gonna celebrate Christmas because that's a pagan holiday because it doesn't have anything to do with Satoshi. We're gonna celebrate Bitcoin Pizza Day. Yeah, exactly. Proof of Keys Day. Okay, well, without further ado, everyone, thank you so much for listening to Bitcoin Season 2. We'll catch you next week. If you're listening to this and you're planning on coming to Bitcoin Vegas, catch us in person at Bitcoin Vegas. Colin will be heavy on the mining stage, and I will be where all of the degenerates hang out, talking about JPEGs and ordinals, and maybe a little bit of technical Bitcoin discussion. So thank you all so much. Catch you later.